Story of Patty Hearst behind kidnapping, bank robbery and jailbreak. Why American President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. This story will present an unbiased view, detailing Patty Hearst's background, the infamous kidnapping, trial, imprisonment, and aftermath, as well as less-known personal and societal insights. Patty Hearst is famous for being kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, in 1974 and later participating in their criminal activities, most notably a bank robbery, which raised questions about whether she was a victim of brainwashing or an accomplice. The Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, was a radical left-wing militant group active in the United States during the early 1970s. Formed by a small group of revolutionaries with a mix of Marxist and anti-capitalist ideologies. The SLA aimed to incite social change through acts of violence and disruption. Most infamously known for kidnapping Patty Hearst and orchestrating high-profile crimes like bank robberies and shootings. Patricia Campbell Hearst was born on February 20, 1954, in San Francisco, California, into one of the most influential and wealthy families in the United States. Her grandfather, William Randolph Hearst, was a powerful newspaper magnate, known for building an empire of sensational journalism that impacted public discourse. The Hearst family, marked by their vast fortune, luxurious estates, and legacy in publishing, had a profound cultural footprint. Patty's father, Randolph Apperson Hearst, worked within the Hearst Corporation, maintaining the family's opulent yet complex inheritance. Patty grew up alongside her sisters, Anne and Victoria, in an environment rife with privilege yet constrained by the expectations and trappings of wealth. Patty's life began with a semblance of conventionality. She was raised with access to the finest private schools, elite social circles, and all the benefits that wealth could bestow. Her upbringing was marked by an adherence to traditional values yet shadowed by the unique pressures of belonging to a family whose name was synonymous with power and influence. By her late teens, Patty sought to carve out a semblance of independence from her gilded cage. In 1972, she enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, a bastion of activism and political fervor during the counterculture movement. At Berkeley, she engaged in the life of a typical young student, living with her fiancé, Stephen Weed, in an apartment not far from campus. However, Patty Hearst's life took a harrowing turn on the night of February 4, 1974. At the age of 19, she was abducted from her Berkeley apartment by members of the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, a radical left-wing group that viewed itself as an urban guerrilla force bent on challenging systemic injustices. The SLA's beliefs were a pastiche of Marxist and revolutionary ideas, painted over with an aggressive call to arms against perceived oppression. The kidnapping was violent and chaotic. Patty was dragged from her home as Stephen Weed was beaten unconscious. Neighbors and bystanders who heard the commotion were left shocked and helpless as Patty was forced into the trunk of a car and driven away. For weeks, Patty's fate was unknown, and the media, already fixated on the Hearst family, swirled with speculation. Then, a chilling audio recording was released to a local radio station, marking the beginning of a bizarre transformation. In it, Patty announced that she had joined her captors, adopting the nom de guerre, Tanya, inspired by a revolutionary figure from the Cuban resistance. The announcement shocked the nation and ignited fierce debates. Was she acting under duress? Or had she experienced what experts would later term Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where hostages begin to empathize with their captors? Over the course of the next several months, Patty became an active participant in SLA activities, most notably a robbery at the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco. The bank's surveillance footage, capturing Patty wielding an assault rifle and yelling orders, became a stark symbol of her shift from victim to revolutionary. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some saw her as an unwilling pawn, brainwashed by her captors, while others argued she had embraced the SLA's radical ideology of her own volition. The notion of whether she was a collaborator or a coerced participant became central to the legal and moral debate that followed. The SLA's ideology, heavily infused with anti-capitalist rhetoric, resonated with disillusioned segments of society. They justified violence as a means to an end, claiming to fight on behalf of oppressed communities. Patty's involvement brought a spotlight to their otherwise fringe agenda, albeit with a taint of notoriety and media sensationalism. During this period, Patty's living conditions oscillated between harsh confinement in makeshift cells and periods of camaraderie with the SLA members, who believed in their cause with zealous fervor. Details of her life with the SLA paint a grim picture of survival laced with ideological fervor and coercion. Her captors, notably Donald "Sink" DeFries, the SLA's self-proclaimed leader, maintained an erratic command that straddled a line between calculated violence and sheer paranoia. On September 18, 1975, after more than a year on the run, Patty Hearst was arrested by the FBI in a San Francisco apartment. When the officers burst into the room, she reportedly said, "I'm Tanya." The arrest was the beginning of one of the most scrutinized trials in American history. The question of her agency became the crux of her defense. Patty's legal team, led by famed attorney F. Lee Bailey, argued that she had been brainwashed and acted under extreme duress. The prosecution, however, depicted her as a willing participant who had embraced the radical lifestyle willingly. The trial exposed the intimate details of Patty's transformation and the inner workings of the SLA. The prosecution pointed to her voice on the tapes, her choice to stay with the group during several opportunities to flee, and her actions during the bank robbery as evidence of her complicity. Witnesses spoke of her changed demeanor, recounting stories of her embracing the rhetoric and even issuing threats to those who stood in opposition to the SLA. Patty, who had visibly changed from the timid young woman she was before her abduction, now displayed a hardened and combative persona. Judge Oliver J. Carter presided over the trial, which became a media spectacle with the public eagerly consuming every twist. On March 20, 1976. Patty Hearst was convicted of bank robbery and using a firearm in the commission of a felony. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison, later reduced to 7 years. The severity of her sentence sparked widespread debate. Critics argued that she was being punished not just for her actions but for the symbolic power her case held in the political landscape of the time. Supporters believed the sentence was warranted as a deterrent against violent radicalism. Patty's prison experience was starkly different from her previous life of affluence. She was confined in a federal prison in California, where the conditions, though not as harrowing as those of maximum security facilities, were nonetheless a jarring contrast to her upbringing. Her cell was sparse, the regimen strict, and her identity now defined by a number rather than a legacy. The experience shifted public perception, casting her as a tragic figure caught between privilege and punishment. President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence in 1979, after she had served 22 months. His decision was met with both relief from her supporters and outrage from those who viewed it as an example of preferential treatment due to her wealth and status. Upon release, Patty struggled with reintegration. She married her former bodyguard, Bernard Shaw, in 1979, and they had 2 children together. The couple led a relatively quiet life compared to her previous notoriety, focusing on family and reclaiming normalcy. The specter of her time with the SLA, however, continued to loom over her public image. Her life post-prison was not without moments of public re-engagement. Patty wrote her memoir, Every Secret Thing, published in 1982, where she recounted her version of events, shedding light on the psychological torment she endured. The book, dense with detail, provided readers with her narrative but also reignited debates on the complexity of her transformation. Patty's account detailed her isolation, the abuses she suffered, and the slow erosion of her will that culminated in her compliance. The Hearst legacy, despite the turbulence brought by her abduction and actions, remained intact. The family maintained control over their publishing empire and continued their affluent existence, albeit with the shadow of the incident hanging over them. Patty's wealth, though not directly tied to her grandfather's monumental fortune, ensured her a life far from poverty. She lived comfortably with her husband and children, and though she maintained a low public profile, she occasionally appeared at cultural events and became involved in philanthropic efforts. The story of Patty Hearst continues to intrigue and polarize. While some view her as a symbol of survival against impossible odds, others see her as a participant in radicalism who managed to escape the full brunt of justice due to her privileged background. The dichotomy of victimhood and complicity remains a powerful narrative that fuels discussions about coercion, identity. Patty Hearst is alive as of the most recent information available. Born in 1954, she overcame her notorious past after being pardoned by President Bill Clinton in 2001. Following her release from prison and eventual pardon, she led a relatively private life, focusing on her family and sporadic public appearances, including writing and small roles in films. She currently resides in the United States.